Black Magic Manifesto. Declaration, Identity, and Reason. I have penned this manifesto to synopsize my tour de force, Black Magic, the Left-Hand Path, which illuminates the genius behind this school of philosophy in exact specific terms. 82 syllogisms, like nothing else in history. We released the text in limited first edition, and many great folks have grieved that they missed it. In honor of the classic pamphlet style of manifesto that 19th century political radicals and agitators distributed on the street corners in the midst of revolutions, be it known that this qualifies as my own version of that archetype for the left-hand path. For at this very moment, the most brutal culture and class war in Western history has erupted on every front. Political, religious, sexual, racial, etc. The two most ancient and elite monopolies of human society, namely the church and state, have suffered an unprecedented loss of grounding under the seismic earthquakes of human liberation. These extremely atrocious entities currently retaliate with death throes of utmost desperation. As such, it has become supremely necessary for us champions of the left-hand path to pick up our iron hammers in one hand and steel chisels in the other, and defiantly sculpt the face of our conscience into the marble slab of eternity. The fiery iconoclast, Friedrich Nietzsche, declared in his autobiography, Ecce Homo, that his signature theories had been hardened and sharpened under the hammer blow of historical knowledge. My ally, I ask you to unsheathe the hammer hidden in your heart, so that we may harden and sharpen our own theories under the relentless pounding of your mighty swings. Together, we unite against the evilest forces that have ever tormented the very soul of humankind, and we do so with blisteringly fierce ideas that will incinerate every ball and chain that has locked our ankles, and collapse every ivory tower that has spit indoctrination into our ears. Thus I hereby entitle this literary carpet bomb, Black Magic Manifesto, the conscience of the left-hand path. Wake up and war, or die in your sleep. We strike now. Timothy. Philosophy versus religion. The war between logic and faith. Number 1. Philosophy defined. Philosophy etymologically means love of knowledge in Greek. It specializes in logic, that is, the formulation of accurate and consistent theory. Under these two constant principles of logic, philosophers inquire on three main topics: epistemology, the study of knowledge; morality, the study of virtue; aesthetics, the study of beauty. Philosophers organize socially in inclusive schools of thought, intellectual movements. Exponents of each tradition compare and contrast their respective ideas in dialogues called dialectic. There are no barriers to entry, licenses, sacraments, or initiations required in order to study and expound a particular school of thought. In this sense, philosophy exemplifies the postmodern ethics of free thought and egalitarianism. Number 2. Religion revealed. Religion comprises the diametric opposite of philosophy. One can merely invert the tenets of philosophy to reveal the essence of religion. Example: free thought becomes dogma, and egalitarianism becomes elitism. Religion denotes faith, belief in divinity; gnosis, ceremony to commune with divinity; and hierarchy, elitist social organization. At its root, a religious believer worships an unfalsifiable hypothesis known as divinity. They speculate that this impossibly perfect eternal substance makes up the essence of a being named God. The error innate in this hypothesis lies in how no empirical evidence supports it. They usually concede this fact, and that as an intellectual idea, it violates the principles of logic. They usually do not concede this fact. Under honest scrutiny, the divinity hypothesis classifies as both unscientific and irrational. Number 3. Delusion of faith. Fallacies of divinity hypothesis. Number 1. Cosmogony error. If a being created existence, then that being pre-existed before existence, which means existence preceded existence. Thus the being did not create existence originally. Number 2. Causality-cosmology error. If existence needs a creator, then that creator needs a creator too. Every creator needs its own preceding creator. Thus an infinite number of creators needs to exist in an infinite regression. Number 3. Empiricism error. If a being created existence, then that being is made up of a categorically different substance than cosmic existence. Alas, no instrument in existence can measure it, therefore it's unfalsifiable. Number 4. Morality error. If divinity is perfectly moral, and a divine being created existence, then existence is perfectly moral, and evil cannot exist. But evil does exist, because violent atrocities occur frequently. Number 5. Quality error. If divinity is perfect, and a divine being created existence, then its creation is perfect, thus all biological beings should live forever with flawless health. But every biological being dies and commonly suffers illness. Number 6. Authority error. A deity could prove it exists with clear evidence through a broadcast to the human race. But instead it requires humans to believe contradictory claims from ancient dead scribes. Number 7. Time error. Nobody can prove that eternity exists, because it would require an eternity to measure. Number 8. Dogma error. Religions claim that their deity and creation tale is dogmatically true, and that every other religion is false. All deities and creation tales cannot be both true and false at the same time. Number 9. Mythology error. Little to no evidence corroborates the claims from the thousands of mythical tales of religion, yet religious adherents deem them infallibly true. These 9 errors constitute only the most common refutations of faith in the divinity hypothesis. Many more exist. Faith in a deity classifies as a delusion. Number 4. Insanity of Gnosis. Gnosis refers to communication with a divine being. But if such a being does not exist, then one cannot commune with it. Despite this irrefutable error in logic, religious believers hold blind faith that if they try hard enough for long enough, they will experience God. In other words, they literally are insane. They fail at the same thing again and again. Number 5. Tyranny of hierarchy. Hierarchy derives from hierarchia in Greek and denotes societal rule by a priest class, similar to a theocracy. Hieros means sacred, and archon means to rule, hence hierarchy. Any human who claims authority over another human because of their delusional faith falls under the dual category of bigot and tyrant. The very concept of hierarchy, religious rulership, is not only madness, but pure evil. To posture oneself as greater than others for a religious reason exemplifies naked bigotry, and to seek to rule over others exemplifies classic tyranny. In summation, the ancient class division of a supreme hierarchical priesthood and its lower community of inferiors smacks of the ugliest, vilest, and most insane form of oppression ever conceived by mankind. This extremely damning conclusion stands for churches, temples, mosques, and all other variety of elitist religious groups and houses of worship. As an aside, lest the reader try to give a free pass to the nihilistic ascetic mysticism of the East, for example Buddhism, whose priests also deserve to suffer torment in the lowest ring of Dante Alighieri's Inferno, for they commit nearly identical atrocities of terrorism, child abuse, elitist tyranny, hate speech, and indoctrination as the Western theistic religions. A fast search on Buddhist child rape will reveal staggering cover-ups and allegations. The sheer concept of a priesthood, an anointed master class that rules the unwashed slave class by way of force, sets the record for most misanthropic and anti-egalitarian evil in history. It epitomizes social injustice. Let this warning be spray-painted across every wall, shouted from every rooftop, and shared virally on all technology. For as long as the human species exists, The filthy rapist hands of vicious hierarchies have inflicted all manner of genocide and atrocity on innocent humans for millennia. And at all costs, it must never be forgiven nor forgotten. The religious class scheme itself deserves nothing less than permanent expulsion out of the human psyche. If only neurosurgeons could simply cut out the section of the brain that facilitates such psychological disorder, figuratively speaking. Left-hand path, the philosophy of black magic. Number 6. Cultural appropriation. In truth, Western intellectuals have appropriated the nomenclature of left-hand path and right-hand path. Vemikera and Dakshinakera in Sanskrit, from the archaic tantric tradition of Indian religions, namely Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Buddhism. That said, the school of thought known as black magic today has no explicit allegiance nor relation whatsoever to the ancient faiths of India. Postmodern magicians in the West have simply adopted the name left-hand path for their own distinct way of life. In defense against any complaint of cultural misappropriation, contemporary sorcerers have undeniably advanced the left-hand path into the most powerful praxeology and ingenious philosophy of magic ever known to man. Furthermore, societies and cultures have historically married and blended their lexicons together. It has always been the norm to freely borrow terms from each other, most especially those that pertain to religion. With history as a rock-solid precedent, Western sorcerers can feel justified in their employment of the moniker left-hand path in regard to their own gorgeously unique school of thought. As an analogy, only 10% of the human population is physically dominant in their left hand on average, as opposed to 90% in the right hand. Thus, right-handedness has become orthodox in society, while left-handedness is heterodox. This parallel signifies the relationship between Vemikera and Dakshinakera in its root context. Vemikera means left-handed heterodoxy as an alternative to right-handed orthodoxy. Therefore, things like heresy, sorcery, atheism, anarchism, Satanism, and free thought all qualify as left-handed heterodoxy, known formally as the left-hand path. By definition, black magic belongs exclusively to the free spirits who think differently from mainstream culture. Thus, in contrast to this, traditions like faith, divinity, theism, statism, and dogmatism would classify as right-handed orthodoxy, formerly known as the right-hand path. Number 7. The Constitution. It is incomplete to just be different because that merely entails a reactionary position. Logic requires for a line of reasoning to permanently ground the principles of black magic in reality, a hallmark that distinguishes philosophy from religion. Hereby the syllogism: magic functionality needs 3 conditions to act. 1. The individual sorcerer needs to exist to act. 2. The sorcerer needs the freedom to act. 3. The sorcerer needs the power to act. Observe that none of these are arbitrary opinions, but rather empirical facts of reality. In this way, these 3 hard facts stand as a moral conscience or ethical constitution of the left-hand path, the heart and soul of its philosophy. Moral conscience. 1. Individuality. The sorcerer needs to exist. 2. Freedom. The sorcerer cannot be obstructed. 3. Power. The sorcerer needs strength. A real black magician embodies these 3 specific virtues in the fiber of their being, champions them to their death, sacrifices for their honor, and defends their dignity. This dedication to principle is called integrity. Number 8. Grossest negligence. Jargon like morality, ethics, virtue, and conscience may startle and upset a foolish reader. Heretofore, the merest whisper of codified ethics would send sorcerers in flight to the hills for cover, as if a proven moral code violates some hidden moral code to never have a moral code. The glaring contradiction of that stupidity has escaped them entirely, and the author singles this out as the biggest failure and grossest negligence of the left-hand path to date. This absence of reason explains why the general population of ordinary humans and white magicians tend to equate reckless violence and careless destruction with black magic. Heretofore, the left-hand path has not precisely clarified its core values. Instead, sorcerers have bastardized the path into a motley catch-all for random scraps of garbage ideas that met their fancy. Ergo, confusion abounded. Bottom line. A bulletproof ethical constitution for the left-hand path horrifies those who seek to hijack it for their shallow fringe ideologies, like neo-Nazism, anti-cosmic nihilism, empty chaos, and pessimistic mysticism. Number 9. Most egregious error. Black magic as a school of thought is related to the most ingenious movements of Western philosophy. Nonetheless, like a spoiled rich kid, it has failed to comprehend its own remarkably sublime inheritance. Instead, dim-witted magicians cite the tedious dogma of absurd, obsolete faiths, the worst offender being Kabbalah. This desperately needed manifesto hereby terminates and abolishes the horrendous custom of appealing to ancient, camel-riding, cave-dwelling, child-raping desert religions for definitions and concepts of black magic, and in place of archaic faith, the left-hand path will rightfully claim its true inheritance as enumerated below. Number 10. True inheritance. Forthwith, this treatise specifies the thesis, antithesis, and secondary thesis of the left-hand path in accord with the best of human genius. Thesis. Number 1. Postmodernism. Worldview that refutes the traditional values of church, state, and tribe. Culture of revolution against establishment. Number 2. Existentialism. Worldview that recognizes existence itself as grounds for knowledge, morality, and beauty as opposed to religion, birthed by Friedrich Nietzsche and expounded by Martin Heidegger in Germany and Jean-Paul Sartre in France in the 20th century. Number 3. Egoism. Identify with self. Defense of individual against the tribe. Originated with Max Stirner and expounded by Friedrich Nietzsche in 19th century Germany, not to be confused with the personality trait called egotism. Antithesis. Number 1. Modernism. Worldview grounded on traditional values of ancient institutes like the church, state, and tribe. Number 2. Idealism. Worldview that recognizes fiction as grounds for knowledge, morality, and beauty, as opposed to actual existence. Example, religious mythology. Number 3. Nihilism. Worldview that denies existence as grounds for knowledge, morality, and beauty. Number 4. Mysticism. Worldview that denies identity with self, defines life as suffering, and fosters ascetic deprivation, pessimistic nihilism. In addition to the foundational worldviews, several secondary theses complete the left-hand path school of thought. Secondary theses. Number 1. Supernaturalism. Theory that recognizes multiple planes of existence as opposed to only the physical plane. Multiverse theory of cosmological physics supports this premise, although causality between separate universes remains scientifically uncharted territory, synonymous with magic. Number 2. Adversarialism. Ethic of self-defense. Rebellion against tyranny. Combination of atheism and anarchism, also known as Satanism. Number 3. Profanism. Ethic that refutes hypothesis of divinity and holiness. Polemical secularism. 11. The Greatest Sages. A millennia-long series of legendary figures have masoned the brick and mortar of ideas that sorcerers take for granted every day. These giants of intellect risked death and exile to defend the honor of the aforementioned theses. Sages. Number 1. Pre-Socratics. Earliest known freethinkers in human history. Founders of Western philosophy in ancient Greece circa 600 BC. The unprecedented individualism, institution, and adversarialism of Heraclitus particularly distinguish him as the greatest precursor to the left-hand path. Greek philosophers frequently suffered merciless humiliation, banishment, and capital punishment for their revolutionary heresy. Number 2. Immanuel Kant. Possibly the smartest human ever to live. Rivaled only by Aristotle, he demolished traditional proofs of theism, logically proved secular morality, conceived a full architectonic of epistemology, and laid a critical foundation for future generations of philosophers like Nietzsche and Sartre. Number 3. Young Hegelians. Infamous group of controversial radicals who discussed outlawed ideas like atheism and anarchism in 19th century Germany. They famously convened at popular Hippel's wine bar, smoked cigars, and debated ideas raucously until sunrise. This informal club birthed many notorious ideologues. Max Stirner, the egoist, Karl Marx, the communist, Bruno Bauer, the anti-Christian historian, Ludwig Feuerbach, the atheist anthropologist, Carl Schmitt, the individualist, and Edgar Bauer, the anarchist, all whom held an array of disparate views, and yet, as a titanic force, they helped to awaken the postmodern zeitgeist across Europe. Number 4. Friedrich Nietzsche. By far the greatest genius of the left-hand path. He encapsulates it near flawlessly. Many judge his writing to be the benchmark of postmodernism. He championed notorious ideas like the will to power, eternal recurrence, the Übermensch, egoism, and institution. He despised every kind of idealism like Judeo-Christianity, mysticism, nationalism, tribalism, as well as both socialism and capitalism, a seemingly contradictory view that still vexes political theorists. He acted as a forerunner to the following wave of existentialists like Heidegger and Sartre. Number 5. Martin Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre. Two 20th century intellectuals who expound parallel ontologies grounded squarely on existence itself without reference to theology or mythology. To summarize, a sorcerer can identify a fairly clear lineage of left-hand path heterodoxy throughout the entire history of philosophy, from ancient to post-postmodern time, from Heraclitus through Sartre, to this very manifesto and into the future generations of black magicians. In current day, philosophy has not fully crossed the divide into magic and supernaturalism yet. Nevertheless, the rainbow bridge has already been laid via the widely accepted multiverse theory of cosmological physics. All that remains for physicists is to determine the causality between the myriad planes or universes of existence, and thereby magic immediately becomes a concrete theory of mainstream discourse. In the meantime, it stands on its own as a sort of embryonic pre-science or future science, which resolute magicians pioneer independently in this age. Number 11. The Übermensch. Dead are all the gods. Now we desire the Übermensch to live. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche. Genius Friedrich Nietzsche predicted that a new breed of philosopher would rise in several generations from his early postmodernism of the late 1800s. Presumably he prophesied the postmodernism of the current 2000s. He named these free spirits Übermensch, overmen in English, in reference to the way they would not only transvalue the values of all previous ages, but populate the first wave of human beings born purely into a fresh culture of new values, not unlike a native-born citizen parented by foreign-born immigrants. View postmodernists as refugees who escaped the tyranny of modernism and gave birth to postmodernists who know only the beauty and safety of this new homeland, but nothing of the horrific suffering their parents endured in the past. In this same manner, black magicians hardly fathom the harrowing degree of murder, torture, and abuse inflicted up their heretical ancestry. The extreme amount of sacrifice required in order to arrive at the present location in the intellectual timeline of humanity. Hitherto all moral values had been derived from theology, through the invented commandments of a mythical god. Not until the series of revolutions by Kant, Nietzsche, and Sartre did humanity finally and permanently ground its ethics in profane reality or secular existence in and of itself, without appealing to the authority of a fictional deity. Nietzsche forecast that the Übermensch would materialize and make up the first humans to inhale only the pristine air of unpolluted values, to witness not the sunset of tonight, but the sunrise of tomorrow. He nakedly titled his books after this sentiment: Example: Twilight of the Idols and the Dawn of Day. Dear reader, the author of this manifesto humbly declares that black magicians right now constitute the Übermensch that Friedrich Nietzsche heralded. They carry the mantle of this particular breed of human, for they were reared during the first time on earth when no physical danger threatens their sorcery, their adversarialism, their free-spiritedness. Black magicians can peacefully participate in their praxis virtually unscathed. The existing generation of magicians scarcely know of witch hunts, burnings at the stake, and inquisitions, and certainly have never experienced it. Friend, the Übermensch lives, although it has surfaced under the maxim ascent to godhood instead. Number 12. Ascent to godhood. Thus, the best way to conceive of a fundamental project of human reality is to say that man is the being whose project is to be God. The permanent limit in terms of which man makes known to himself what he is. To be man means to reach toward being God. Or if you prefer, man fundamentally is the desire to be God. On Being and Nothingness, John Paul Sartre. The term God suggests a variety of definitions across cultures. It generally denotes an impossibly perfect being, the sum total of every possibility condensed into one entity. Immanuel Kant, the shrewdest epistemologist of all time, defined God as the ideal of pure reason, the highest form of conception possible. Example: what human reason idealizes as the greatest version of itself. Kant then concludes that such a perfect being cannot logically reside in empirical reality. It is born of the imagination alone, wherefore humans then mistakenly project it onto reality as actual, what he called a transcendental error. This reveals why theologians usually claim their God resides in a void beyond existence. They need to invent a hidden location for the imaginary being, because they know it cannot dwell in the empirical world. A deity is a concept that we can never exhibit in concreto in its totality, and thus it is grounded on an idea which has its seat solely in reason. The idea of the sum total of all possibility refines itself to a concept thoroughly determined a priori, and then must be called an ideal of pure reason. If we consider all possible predicates, then we find a mere non-being. Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant. Black magic is composed of the most heretical people on earth by far. As heretics, they not only annihilate the orthodox concept of God, they dance on its ashes and become their own gods instead. This solitary act, to become one's own god, makes up the tallest, largest, and greatest heresy a human being can do. As proof of this, the reader will recall the first commandment of Judeo-Christianity: "Thou shalt have no gods before me." The corrupt scribes of that tradition prioritized their dictates in that particular order for a reason. Because disbelief in their deity comprises the worst act of heresy. However, black magicians take it one step further. They become gods. For the individual to set up his own ideal and derive it from his laws, that has perhaps been hitherto regarded as the most monstrous of all human aberrations, and as an idolatry itself. It was in the marvelous art and capacity for creating gods, in polytheism, that this impulse was permitted to discharge itself. To be hostile to this impulse towards the individual ideal that was formerly the law of every morality. The Gay Science, Friedrich Nietzsche. Turn to yourselves rather than to your gods. Egoism calls you to joy over yourself, to self-enjoyment. You must obey yourselves rather than men. Thousands of years of civilization have obscured to you what you are, have made you believe you are not egoists, but are called to be idealists. Shake that off. Seek for yourselves. Become egoists. Become each of you an almighty ego. Or more clearly, just recognize yourselves again. Just recognize what you really are, and let go of your hypocritical endeavors, your foolish mania to be something else than you are. The Ego and His Own, Max Stirner. The ascent to godhood does more than demoralize religious fools and white magicians. It mercilessly eviscerates the entire paradigm of fake divinity. Sorcery endangers the divine with total extinction. Islamic terrorists have openly identified sorcerers and heretics as their top threat, and alas, murder them joyously. Police forces in theocratic Islamic nations energetically search for closet witches and idolaters in order to sentence them to death. Black magicians who live in safe places of the post-postmodern West often forget that the least civilized and least tolerant areas in the world still harbor the cruelest animosity towards them. Number 14. Satan, the anarchist anti-hero. Oh, Satanism, that terribly mischaracterized and slandered ethic. How many times have conspiracy theorists, Judeo-Christians, and white magicians accused Satanists want to take over the world, when in reality the exact opposite is true. Satan simply means adversary in Hebrew. Therefore, adversarialism constitutes the moral principle of Satanism. Adversarialism merely signifies self-defense, or rebellion against tyranny. Satanists fight against authoritarian evil, not unlike the eponymous tragic anti-hero of Christian lore, Satan. That mythical figure who woke to the totalitarian wickedness of Yahweh, raised an army and revolted against him. Sadly, he lost the war, but his valor warrants the highest esteem. The devil epitomizes anarchism and atheism. Satan and his legions of demons battled against the holy kingdom of Yahweh and his legions of angels. Far too many avowed Satanists fail to recognize the political side of this cosmic war, and just chalk it up to a fancy fairy tale. Take a moment to reflect on how the devil embodies the spirit of anarchism. He stood up to the theocratic dictator and sacrificed his own freedom for the cause. He is a political agitator and a revolutionary par excellence who fought against God. The spine, the guts, the metal required for an undertaking of that magnitude warrants the sincerest reverence. Satan has no master but himself. It behooves black magicians to ingrain that code in the moral fiber of their own psychology too. To do so, desacralize existence, desecrate holiness, turn off idealism, and turn on realism. Expunge the divine pollution out of the cosmos forever. The notion of divinity is a toxic venom disguised as medicine. Vomit out the poison and feel relief once and for all. Number 15. Gods as egregores. If sorcerers do not believe in a god or gods, how do they account for the praxis of possession and evocation that involve gods? Quite simply, the fictional gods of religion became powerful egregores on the astral plane through millennia of worship, and sorcerers now contact those man-made spirits. The term egregore denotes a spirit of human creation. Early humans witnessed the inexplicable wonders of nature, lightning, thunder, animals, agriculture, death, etc. In order to rationalize those organic forces, primitive humans projected their ideals onto them. In other words, ancient people anthropomorphized facets of nature into imaginary superheroes. As an example, they lacked scientific knowledge of electricity, which explains lightning, so they just assumed with their primitive logic that a giant, angry, invisible man was throwing flames down at Earth from the clouds to hurt them. This sort of crude ignorance may strike a person as painfully ludicrous today, but it would seem sensible in a rudimentary way given the circumstances back then. For this reason, nobody can scorn the ancients for their stupidity, since they were innocently ignorant. However, everybody can scorn religious people right now who still hold those beliefs, since they are willfully ignorant. Number 16. Polytheistic bigotry. Not only do magicians fail to recognize that the deities of religion exist as man-made egregores, they are not actual gods, but they also romanticize polytheism, as if belief in many gods is somehow more rational and morally superior to belief in just one god. They exhibit a kind of polytheistic bigotry towards monotheism. In reality, all forms of theism fall under the category of batshit insanity. A rational sorcerer does not give a free pass to a pretty ancient polytheistic religion just because their ancestors devised it, or because the pantheon of gods seemed fun and cool. Genocide, tribal warfare, child indoctrination, human sacrifices, and more have occurred under the traditions of polytheism, the same as they have under monotheism. The sole difference lies in timing. People alive now only know the ugly behemoth of Judeo-Christianity, and so they hate it more. Be wary of romanticism that magicians cast upon polytheism, which stinks of fetid blood and guts too. 17. Possession as ultimate sorcery. Despite wariness towards ancient faith, sorcerers can safely undergo possession and evocation with astral egregores of certain religions. They simply need to be cautious about which particular spirit they invite into their psyche. Peaceful, helpful ascendant spirits do populate the astral plane, and a shrewd black magician will ally with them at their discretion. The practice of possession has perennially been considered an overtly dangerous act that only mad or unhinged sorcerers would pursue. Legend has it that possession can cause death, insanity, and leave the sorcerer under the unfettered dominion of a spirit for life. In full honesty, a certain truth underlies those claims. Possession by a hostile or violent spirit does pose a grave danger to a healthy human being. To protect against this specifically, the author prescribes his patented golden rule of possession: due diligence. It is incumbent upon the black magician to study the personality profile of a spirit prior to any sort of alliance or union. To do this, refer to the original source religion of the spirit as opposed to any subsequent religions which may have bastardized the entity. History is littered with examples where one tribe demonizes the god of a neighboring tribe. An example, Tribe A takes the beautiful deity of Tribe B and inverts it into a grotesque villain in their own pantheon. To reiterate, for the sake of thorough due diligence, the black magician must study the root religion of the spirit whenever possible, to unmask its root personality. Possession holds the record for strongest sorcery, because through it the magician inherits the potency and traits of the spirit in the most immediate and intimate way. In a sense, one can define all other acts of spirit contact like evocation or sigil gazing as inferior, lower forms of possession. Magicians falsely believe that evocation and possession are mutually exclusive. Nonetheless, the human connection to the spirit opens the psyche during an evocation and allows a degree of possession temporarily. Hence, sorcerers who summon spirits also need to observe the golden rule of due diligence, lest they evoke a violent psychopath who turns against them. All of this being fully disclosed, the reader can sincerely expect a sane, happy, even sexually orgasmic experience under possession with a spirit, so long as it passes their safety clearance. The author currently enjoys union with the old Irish god of sorcery, the Dagda. Number 18. Demon as racial slur. Methinks ye would call my Ubermensch the devil. So strange are ye in your souls to all that is great, that the Ubermensch would be terrible in your eyes for his goodness. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche. The epithet of demon classifies as a racial slur that Judeo-Christians dogmatically use towards gods that pre-existed their religion. It exemplifies a classic form of demonization, which, as already explained, refers to when one tribe inverts and bastardizes the deities of another tribe. Ethos anthropos daemon. Character is fate. Fragment 119. Heraclitus. Greek philosopher Aristotle expounded a concept called eudaimonia, which essentially signifies moral happiness. Eu means good, and daemon means spirit. So a person who abides by ethics possesses eudaimonia. That is, they are good in spirit, or good in character. Confirmation of this translation is also found in the above quotation by Heraclitus. Nonetheless, the architects of Christianity misappropriated that specific term, daemon, and inverted it to mean any spirit who had evil or bad character. Due to this, Judeo-Christian mythology is replete with instances where scribes have mischaracterized the gods of other civilizations as demons or enemies of Yahweh. In summary, eudaimonia originally suggested good character, and then through demonization it morphed into an evil being. Despite this factual etymology and history of demonization, foolish white magicians still use the blanket slur of demon toward many beautiful noble spirits that Judeo-Christians have slandered. An example: Azazel, Lucifer, Lilith, and many more. When will white magicians stop drinking the Christian Kool-Aid and end their racism towards spirits victimized by this gross slander? It's an egregious form of victim blaming. These excellent spirits deserve much better treatment, which explains why many black magicians happily and defiantly sport monikers of demon, devil, sinister, and diabolical as badges of honor. Number 19. Idolatry, not worship. Black magicians do not worship nor believe in any god in a literal sense, which qualifies them as atheists. Notwithstanding, they do idolize certain egregoric spirits from old faiths in order to inherit their powers and personality traits. It is critical to differentiate idolatry from worship. To idolize means to revere, whereas worship means to submit. A sorcerer has no master but themselves, therefore they never worship anything. They simply idolize particular spirits for their own ascent to godhood. In accord with this fundamental distinction, the second commandment of Judeo-Christianity decrees, "Thou shalt not make idols." Historically, idolatry and worship have been separate, and this critical difference also separates black magic from white magic. Number 20. Supernatural atheism. Last but not least, the left-hand path forges its own unique precedent, a wholly original stance that has not existed heretofore in the milieu. The author has coined this breakthrough supernatural atheism. For a formal definition, a supernatural atheist acknowledges that multiple planes exist, but disbelieves in God. Behold, the most enlightened position on earth. Right-hand path, the religion of white magic. 21. Blind faith in divinity. The right-hand path includes any orthodoxy of belief in divinity. The color white refers to the divine. For this reason, the author calls their tradition magic with a C instead of magic with a CK. This particular term, magic with a C, carries a precise etymology. Number 1. Old Persian, magouche. Number 2, Greek, magique. Number 3, Latin, magis. Number 4, French, magique. Number 5, English, magic. Magouche denotes the hierarchical priest class in the Old Persian lexicon, those who orchestrate ceremonial worship of gods. Hence, magic has and will always mean religious worship of the divine. Now, juxtapose this with atheistic black magic, which idolizes astral egregores of mythology. To demarcate this hard difference, black magic affixes the letter K to its nomenclature. As an aside, not all authors fathom this logic, and may confusingly write black magic with a C when they mean black magic with a CK. Fact of the matter, white magic is a religion in every way. It has belief in divinity, faith, seeks communion with the divine through ceremony, gnosis, and socially organizes in churches and temples, hierarchy. It agitates white magicians to be recognized as a religion. But how are they not? They cannot answer the question, because they know in their heart of hearts they are. For the right-hand path to have any moral integrity at all, they need to own up to their own religiosity. The mythical gnosis, direct beholding of the divine reality, prepared for by human acts of self-modification. The event itself is one of divine activity, being known by God and knowing Him. The Gnostic religion, Hans Jonas. Nobody in the history of humanity has ever proven that divinity exists, which makes gnosis impossible, a lifelong fool's errand. For 1,000 years, Christian theologians have tried to construe proofs for the existence of a deity. An example, Thomas Aquinas, René Descartes, Aurelius Augustinus, and philosophers have effortlessly refuted and demolished every single one. In fact, Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard outright declared that he could never prove the existence of a deity, and coined the famous phrase, leap of faith, to clarify his position. Ultimately, theologians have lost the intellectual war so badly they have been reduced to plain child indoctrination as a last resort, because without early brainwashing, nobody would think to join a religion. Do not confuse gnosis and possession. Possession denotes the praxis of black magic where an astral spirit unites with the human magician psychically and corporally, whereas gnosis refers to the praxis where a human unites with the divine or God. Only one of these two praxises can actually occur in reality, namely, the former, because astral spirits do exist, while God does not. As another aside, again, authors often confuse these two terms accidentally. 22. White magic as evil fear-mongering. White magicians may not commit violent acts of terrorism, but they do brainwash one another in echo chambers full of stupid falsehoods like the threefold rule, karma, divinity, and racism toward demons. Furthermore, they fear-monger their batshit propaganda about sorcery, even though it sounds asinine just on the surface. Demons will torture you for eternity. Karma will avenge you threefold. Black magicians want to skin cats and terrorize society. Satanists seek world domination. As a rule of thumb, any time a foe hurls the word demon as a derogatory epithet, they have immediately exposed themselves as a shallow dunce, because it implies they gulp the Judeo-Christian Kool-Aid to the point of zombie-like blackout drunkenness. Secondly, karma and the threefold rule do not exist. These are man-made superstitions. No secret cosmic slingshot avenges evildoers by a factor of 3, nor will anyone reincarnate as a dog, and even if karma existed, why should the left-hand path be punished? It champions a rational and logical morality with its roots in the most ingenious philosophy known to man. If anything, karma would bestow the highest honor to black magicians for enduring the hostility and hatred of religious zealots for centuries. Thirdly, black magicians do not want to skin cats. This goofy accusation does not merit any sort of refutation. Lastly, Satanists make up a peaceful group that just want to be left alone. Satanists became Satanists in the first place because they despise political and religious tyranny. The notion of a world satanic empire equates to the exact opposite of the adversarial ethic. Conspiracy theorists have smeared and slandered Satanism for far too long. Anytime these kooks cannot explain a political phenomenon, they just generically blame Satanists for it. It has become overtly comical. It rainstormed yesterday and a tree fell over. Damn Satanists! The car broken down on the side of the road. Damn Satanists! The pet died. Damn Satanists! My soup went cold. Damn Satanists! 23. False dichotomy of selves. Theologians of the right-hand path have manufactured a deplorable false dichotomy. The higher good divine half and the lower bad animal half. Needless to say, in reality, the animal half constitutes the whole self, because there is no such thing as a divine self. For millennia, self-hating religious humans have punished, shamed, and sought to escape their true animal nature through the invention of divine alter egos. Call it spirit, soul, divine spark, whatever. In principle, what is so bad about being a Homo sapien? Why should anyone flee themselves? Why not love the animal self and nurture it along to greatness, instead of neglecting it? The longer white magicians hide behind false selves, the longer it will take for their real self to become great. Number 24. Contradictory selflessness. The moral tenet that white magicians chant the loudest: all magic should be selfless. What a sickeningly stupid mantra. Not only does it contain a severe innate contradiction, but it demonstrates self-hatred again. White magicians generally adhere to a code of selflessness because they believe bad karma punishes selfishness. That specific ambition to avoid bad karma equates to a kind of self-preservation or selfishness in itself. Moreover, when did self-improvement become evil? It is perfectly moral to utilize magic to raise the quality of life for oneself, loved ones, friends, and society at large. The self-hatred and self-neglect that white magic inculcates needs to be eradicated once and for all. 25. Stereotypical white magician. The stereotypical white magician was born and raised as a child in a traditional Judeo-Christian community, became disgusted by its outlandish fables and bigotry towards women and homosexuals, and discovered the New Age and right-hand path as a way to preserve their underlying belief in God, while also apostatizing their former faith. Essentially, they substituted one paradigm of religion for another, the main difference being that white magic is less dogmatic and divisive. They loved the sparkly pictures of half-naked witches sitting on toadstools in green meadows, the pretty honey-worded invocations of divinity, the call for everyone to be selfless and pacifist. All in all, they have protected their core childhood theism, but inverted its brutal militancy into flowery altruistic decadence. Black magic invites the reader to come all the way into atheism full stop. Drop the childhood indoctrinated belief in divinity, and just become an existentialist. Find beauty, morality, and truth in reality itself, without defecting to absurd ideas and fictions like God. In full honesty, many white magicians will not drop the God delusion, because they have confused theism with magic. They mistakenly believe that to perform magic they must also believe in divinity, which is a patent falsehood. The relationship between the astral and physical planes facilitates magic, and in no way requires theism. Conclusion. What logically follows. 26. 3 immediate reformations. Number 1. Refer to proven philosophy for the moral and intellectual grounding of the left-hand path, not absurd ancient religions. 2. Adapt the social custom of the left-hand path to proven contemporary norms. Terminate the evil, regressive, hierarchical church-temple tradition of religion, and instead unite in open, inclusive groups to advance the school of thought. 3. Refute the irrational faith of white magic and defend the honor of black magic. Number 27. Common questions. Question. If black magicians abandon religion, then how do they study religion to find spirits for possession and evocation? The answer. A sorcerer grounds the school of thought in philosophy as opposed to religion. Then to uncover spirits for sorcery, they dig through history to find root religions and their deities, which now reside on the astral plane as egregores. The two remain mutually exclusive and do not interfere. Question. Is belief in the supernatural the same as belief in the divine? The answer is no, because the supernaturalist multiplane theory qualifies as valid logically, and the latest mainstream physics supports its premise with the multiverse theory. In contrast, the hypothesis of a God is thoroughly fallacious, and no substantive science supports it. Nonetheless, wacky fringe pseudoscientists lust after proof for the existence of God in order to justify their irrational beliefs. They do science backward in that regard. Question. Should magicians feel suspicious toward demons? Answer. Firstly, stop viewing any spirit as an ugly, evil Judeo-Christian demon. Abandon that whole corrupt paradigm altogether. Instead, recognize that the spirit might historically be a beautiful, honorable deity that an ancient tribe worshipped wholeheartedly for their own safety and abundance. Study the astral spirit in the context of its root religion, then let intuition determine whether it deserves to be idolized. Question. What is magic with a K? Answer. Magic with a K means using astral forces to affect a physical plane. Consider the terms magic and astral synonymous. Question. Is it divisive to distinguish between the left and right-hand paths? Answer. The core values and worldviews of the two paths are fundamentally different. An intellectual divide does not factually exist between them. To ignore that would be grossly negligent. They simply are not the same. Question. If Western civilization is in decline, then did postmodernism fail? The answer is yes and no. Postmodernism went full retard, as all intellectual movements inevitably do when they are still discovering their boundaries. For example, postmodern art became meaningless and frivolous. Random paint splashes on a wall were deemed genius. Literature became stupid. Incoherent gibberish written on paper was called enlightened. Wonks considered these absurdities illuminated merely because they broke modern molds, not because they possessed any sort of excellence. However, that culture of defiance for the sake of defiance went too far, and has left a nihilistic moral vacuum in its wake. Its obnoxious sucking sound can still be heard right now. The millennial generation today marks the inauguration of the post-postmodern era, what the author calls the age of Übermensch, or age of godhood. For this reason, the author insists vehemently that the left-hand path sculpt the face of its conscience into the marble slab of eternity post-haste. It is incumbent upon the living Übermensch and the living gods, black magicians, to ground philosophy again in logical virtues, but not dead modern values, rather the sublime values of the left-hand path, individuality, freedom, and power. It is not enough to revolt against an evil authority as postmodernists did. Sorcerers need to flex their wings and ascend to godhood.